What happens when the Department of Justice, the very institution built to uphold truth and protect the law, is accused of punishing one of its own for refusing to lie? That's the explosive question Senator Chris Van Hollen threw straight at Attorney General Pam Bondi in a Senate hearing that quickly turned into a public reckoning. At the center of it all is a veteran whistleblower with 15 years of service who says he was fired for refusing to sign off on a brief he believed was dishonest. But as Bondi tried to deflect, the scandal only deepened, touching not just whistleblower protections but even funding for crime victims.
In January, the then acting Attorney General fired more than a dozen prosecutors simply because they had been assigned to work with Special Counsel Jack Smith. And dozens of others have also been wrongfully terminated. And you picked up where the acting Attorney General left off when you fired the pardon attorney after she declined to restore the gun rights to a close friend of President Trump with a domestic violence conviction. Perhaps most troubling, Madam Attorney General, is you have fired attorneys like the acting Deputy Director of the Office of Immigration Litigation simply for telling the truth in court. As he said yesterday, the whistleblower, in a complaint filed, quote, "I didn't sign up to lie." That sends a terrible message to every DOJ attorney who wants to both do their job and uphold their professional ethics and integrity. While spending taxpayer resources to defend this lawbreaking, the administration has proposed a budget that is a gift to our foreign adversaries, to the drug cartels, and to illegal firearms traffickers. Why do I say that? Let's look at each of those categories. On your first day, you disbanded the FBI Foreign Influence Task Force Office, which was established to combat secret malign influence campaigns by China, Russia, and other adversaries. On that day, you also restricted the scope of criminal charges under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Your budget cuts the Drug Enforcement Administration and eliminates funding for the organized crime drug enforcement task forces, which coordinate interagency efforts to combat the worst drug trafficking cartels. And you're effectively dismantling efforts to go after illegal gun traffickers by attempting to dissolve the ATF. At the same time, this budget undermines local law enforcement by stripping away funding that's critical to protecting our local schools and reducing violent crime in rural communities. And many organizations that help the victims of crimes are running out of their fiscal year 25 funds because, for example, the Office of Justice Programs has only posted one grant solicitation for 2025. Meanwhile, under the guise of efficiency, your budget proposes to combine and significantly cut the three distinct DOJ grant-making agencies, including the Office on Violence Against Women, which you propose to slash by 30%. There is nothing efficient about reducing services to victims of crime. Your budget also indicates that transparency and integrity are not priorities of the Justice Department. Over the last 5 months, you've decimated the public integrity section. Public reports indicate that this office went from 30 attorneys to as few as 5. Your budget would also slash the department's oversight watchdog, the Office of Inspector General, by $42 million. Inspector General Horowitz told me that these cuts would result in the elimination of 140 positions, which would bring investigations to a halt and interfere with the IG's ability to conduct oversight of the department. I would note that it was an OIG investigation that helped uncover the FBI's serious mishandling of allegations of sexual abuse against former USA gymnastics physician Larry Nassar. Why target these key areas of public integrity, oversight, and accountability? So, Attorney General Bondi, I hope you'll answer our questions today. I say that because your department has failed to respond to any of the 9 inquiries I have made and have responded to only 2 of 38 letters sent by my colleagues, the ranking members of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, Senator Durbin and Congressman Raskin. So, Madam Attorney General, we have much to discuss this morning. I look forward to your testimony.
The story begins with Ruveni, a career attorney who spent more than a decade at the DOJ. He wasn't a low-level staffer or a troublemaker looking for attention. By all accounts, Ruveni was decorated, commended, and respected for his work during the Trump administration. That's what makes his decision to speak out even more shocking. In his whistleblower complaint, Ruveni claims he was pushed to sign an appeal brief he believed had no basis in evidence or law. When he refused, he says he was promptly shown the door. His words cut right through the legal jargon. "I didn't sign up to lie." That single sentence set the stage for one of the most contentious Senate hearings in recent memory. When Van Hollen confronted Bondi, the tension in the room was immediate. This wasn't about policy nuances or minor disagreements. It was about whether the Department of Justice itself had crossed a red line. Van Hollen asked her directly, did she believe zealous advocacy meant telling untruths to the courts? It was a pointed question designed to cut through the political theater and force Bondi to clarify her stance. Instead, she leaned on the classic shield of pending litigation. She said she couldn't discuss the case, citing ongoing lawsuits and attorney-client privilege. But the longer she danced around the core issue, the more it looked like she was dodging accountability. Rather than address the substance of Ruveni's claims, Bondi pivoted to defending her closest allies inside the DOJ. She singled out Amal Bowe, a senior official whose confirmation hearing for a federal judgeship was happening at the same time Ruveni's complaint surfaced. Bondi painted Bowe as brilliant, ethical, and unfairly maligned by the whistleblower's accusations. She also invoked Todd Blanche, her deputy attorney general, as another trustworthy figure who supposedly refuted Ruveni's account. To Bondi, the timing of the complaint was remarkable, almost as if she believed it was a calculated hit job designed to derail her team's advancement. But to many listening, it sounded less like a defense of principle and more like circling the wagons to protect loyal insiders. The longer the hearing went on, the more it became clear that Van Hollen wasn't going to let Bondi slip away with canned responses. After all, this wasn't just about one attorney's job. It was about whether the DOJ under her leadership had become a place where political loyalty mattered more than truth. And just when it seemed the whistleblower issue had hit a wall, Van Hollen shifted gears, pointing to another brewing scandal inside the department. He pressed Bondi on why the DOJ had abruptly terminated hundreds of grants, including programs that provided services to crime victims. These weren't minor slush funds or obscure pilot projects. Some of the grants had been in place for years, funding shelters, legal aid groups, and training for law enforcement. Cutting them wasn't just an accounting decision. It pulled the rug out from under people and organizations who depend on federal support to survive. Van Hollen made it clear these cuts weren't abstract budget debates, they had real consequences for real people. Bondi's response didn't exactly calm the waters. She admitted the department had cut funding by about 6%, but tried to soften the blow by inviting senators to call her if they cared about a specific grant. She even promised to review appeals on a case-by-case basis. On paper, that might sound like an open-door policy. But in practice, it came across as tone-deaf. Telling lawmakers to personally petition her while shelters and victim support groups scramble to keep their doors open only reinforced the perception that this DOJ is more concerned with political optics than people's lives. Van Hollen wasn't satisfied either. He reminded Bondi that 30 senators had already written to her about frozen funds from the previous fiscal year and they hadn't received a response. To him, this wasn't just about individual grants or bureaucratic delays. It was about whether the DOJ under Bondi was operating with transparency and accountability at all. When oversight committees can't even get basic answers about funding, it raises bigger questions about what else is being hidden behind closed doors. And that's the thread that tied both controversies together, the whistleblower retaliation and the grant cuts. In both cases, the DOJ was accused of punishing truth-tellers and neglecting victims while top officials shielded themselves with privilege and procedure. Whether intentional or not, the message being sent was clear: if you speak out against the department, you risk your career, and if you depend on the department, you might just become collateral damage. For a place that's supposed to embody the rule of law, that image is devastating. By the end of the hearing, Bondi's deflections had left more questions than answers. She insisted that zealous advocacy always meant acting ethically, but her refusal to explain why Ruveni was punished told another story. She promised funding announcements would come very shortly, but the damage had already been done to countless programs left in limbo. And she pledged loyalty to her deputies while offering nothing to reassure whistleblowers that their honesty would be protected. It was a masterclass in stonewalling, but not in leadership. Van Hollen, for his part, made it clear that the stakes couldn't be higher. If the DOJ starts firing people for refusing to lie, it sets a precedent that erodes the very foundation of justice. If the DOJ slashes victim services without accountability, it undermines public trust in the government's willingness to protect its most vulnerable citizens. And if the DOJ keeps hiding behind attorney-client privilege and vague promises, oversight itself becomes meaningless. This isn't about partisan politics or grandstanding, it's about whether one of the most powerful institutions in the country is serving the people or just serving itself. The hearing may have ended, but the ripple effects are only beginning. Ruveni's lawsuit will proceed, and it may reveal more about the inner workings of Bondi's DOJ. The funding cuts will continue to impact shelters, advocacy groups, and law enforcement agencies across the country. And lawmakers like Van Hollen will keep pressing for answers because the questions are too serious to ignore. At its core, this clash was about one thing: accountability, and accountability is either alive or it's not. There's no middle ground. So the question remains, what kind of Justice Department do we really have right now? Is it one that protects whistleblowers and victims, or one that silences critics and hides behind technicalities? The answer matters far beyond this one hearing. Because if truth-tellers are punished and victims are forgotten, justice itself starts to crumble. And once that happens, getting it back won't be easy. If you found this breakdown important, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the DOJ under Pam Bondi is protecting the law or protecting itself? And if you want to stay ahead of stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next one is even more controversial.